E nós vamos começar agora uma atividade que é um workshop. Então, o nosso palestrante pediu para que os empreendedores e todos vocês se sentassem mais perto dele, por favor. Vamos lá? Vinit Nijhawan, ele é um empreendedor serial e investidor em diversas empresas. Ele é o diretor do Centro de Desenvolvimento de Tecnologias da Boston University. Ele é especialista em licenciamento de patentes. Montou toda essa estrutura na Boston University, que é uma referência atualmente. E ele é professor do MBA da Boston University. Por favor, Vinit.
Thank you. And you guys are much better than my students. I tell them to move forward and they don't move. So, just before I get going, I was asked to give a shout out to American Airlines. Is Alicia here from American Airlines? She's going to be back. And American Airlines sponsored some of our flights out here, so we want to thank them. And we want you all to buy tickets in American Airlines. How's that for a shout out to a sponsor? So, question. How many of you are entrepreneurs? None on this side? The entrepreneurs are all on the right side. I like the right-wing types. We have a few over there. How many of you are going to be pitching today? A couple of you. So it's already too late for you to change what I'm doing, but you might learn something. So, you know, the previous speaker, what was so engaging about him? He spoke for almost an hour, right? And it was really engaging. What was so engaging about him? Anybody? What did you like about him? Examples, right? And by examples, stories. Stories, right? He was telling a story. Throughout his whole thing, it was about stories. And this is basically what you have to do. When you pitch your idea, you have to tell a story, right? And that's what I'm going to show you here is a way to tell the story. The way I'm going to show you isn't the only way to tell a story, but it's one way to tell a story. But the important thing to think about is you're telling a story. And like any good story, it has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end, right? And there are all kinds of ends. There are happy endings, there are sad endings. Your story should have a happy ending. That's your goal, right? So it's about telling a story. That's what a pitch is. You can tell your story in many different lengths, right? You can tell a 30-second story. That's what they call an elevator pitch, right? Why do they call it an elevator pitch? You meet somebody in an elevator and you have 15, 20, 30 seconds between floors to tell your story, right? Now, unless you're in the elevator in our hotel here in Portugal, then you have about 3 minutes. But you have 15 seconds to tell a story. And that's why they call it an elevator pitch. And what's the goal in that 15, 30 seconds? Your goal is to get that person to acknowledge that they will accept a message from you. Usually your executive summary, for your business idea. That's your goal. In 15, 30 seconds, all you have to do is get them to say, yes, send me an email with your executive summary. That's all you're trying to do, nothing more, right? You're not telling your life story. You're not telling about that you only have, you have rent for the next 2 weeks. Unless you raise money, you're in real trouble. You're not saying any of that. All you're trying to do is getting them to accept that they'll get an email from you, right? So let's say the person says, okay, we'll get the email. Now you get an opportunity to make an investor pitch, like the one you're going to make later today in an audience, right? What does that look like? Well, again, it's a story, but there are different lengths to the story. There's a short investor pitch, which is usually about 3 minutes. I think, is that what they're doing today? It's about 3 minutes? So that's pretty typical in an investor session. You'll get about 3 minutes to tell your story. 3 minutes feels like nothing. It's actually a long time. You'll be surprised. 3 minutes is a long time. But 3 minutes can become incredibly short if you don't stick to, you know, the pace of your story. A lot of people get lost in one little part of their story, and they get lost in one little part of the story because it's that one that they connect with the most, right? It could be, you know, a lot of people get lost in the problem statement, right? Where you're explaining what the problem is that you're trying to address with your business idea. People could spend the entire 3 minutes just on the problem statement. I've seen that many, many times. So it's really important to know your 3 minutes, and like good theater, because this is theater, you have to know your pace, and you have to stay on pace, right? And the goal for your 3-minute presentation is really simple. It's to get the one-on-one meeting with an investor. And if at this pitch session you're going to be in this afternoon, your goal is to get at least one investor to invite you to come give a full presentation. That's your goal. Nothing else. You're not trying to get money from people. They're not going to write you a check. You know, they're not going to, you know, say good things about your business. None of that stuff. And you don't care about any of that. You just want to get the meeting. Once you get the meeting, then you've got 10 to 30 minutes to tell your full story in a measured way. And the goal there is really simple again. The goal is to move to due diligence, right? So if the investor, and usually when you do that one-on-one meeting, there'll be more than one person in the room. There'll be a group of people in the room. There'll be, you know, and if we're talking about venture capital, there's lots of types of investors, but let's say this is venture capital investors. If you're lucky, the partner will be in the room. With the partner will be the associate, the person who's going to be doing all the work in due diligence, right? In many cases, you may not get to meet the partner the first time. In many cases, you just get to meet the associate or a group of associates. That's okay. The goal is to move into due diligence. And what I mean by due diligence is that they're interested enough that they're going to now start looking into your story. They're going to start looking into the market, perhaps. They're going to start maybe calling some you know, potential customers or what we call key opinion leaders. You know, most venture capitalists, the first thing they'll do is they'll pick up the phone and call some key opinion leaders in the business that you're pitching, in that space, right? And again, it's very important to think that of what your goal is in each one of these things, from the 30-second to the 3-minute to the 10 to 30-minute. And it's important not to try to rush too far ahead of this process, because this is how the process works. It's time consuming. I mean, for the ones of you who were here yesterday, you know, in the angel investor session, I think, you know, what you heard is it takes 90 days to close, I think, and that's 90 days after all this, right? It takes time to raise money, and you cannot move it any faster than it does. It's just the process. And if you try to move it faster, you start looking desperate, and that's the last thing you want to do. You want to sort of, in your storytelling, you're trying to, you know, present this self-confidence, you know, about your story, which sometimes is hard because, you know, all startup companies, regardless of where they are in the world, you know, the one thing I've learned about startup companies is they're always short of cash, right? Always. And I've been in situations many times personally where, you know, I didn't have enough cash in the bank to get past one payroll, right? And I was extremely dependent on getting money raised, you know, before the following payroll. It happens to all startup companies. No matter how good you are, how well prepared you are, you get to some point where that happens. And sometimes it happens when you're really growing really fast and you still run out of cash. So you always have to sort of project that self-confidence in your story, right? But you still have to follow the pace at which this process works. Any questions? So let's talk about what the elevator pitch looks like. This is now the 30-second, the elevator pitch. Like I told you, there are different ways to tell your story. I'm giving you one way, which is a way that I've learned to do it. This isn't the only way. That's important to know. This is not something out of a textbook. You should tell the story the way you feel comfortable telling the story. But broadly in an elevator pitch, there's 4 components to an elevator pitch, right? There's the hook. You have to get somebody's attention, right? I got your attention today by getting you all to move forward. There's a hook of some kind to get somebody's attention. Then you have to have a connection with that person. Right? There has to be something personal, a personal connection. I try to make a personal connection with you by asking how many of you were entrepreneurs. That's a way to make a personal connection, right? Next is, what's the benefit for that person you're pitching to? It's not what's the benefit to you, what's the benefit to them, right? So I asked you guys who was going to pitch this later today, right? Because this is a benefit to you, what I'm talking about here. And lastly, and this is really important because a lot of entrepreneurs forget the most important thing, the 4th one. There's an ask. You get so excited in the time of telling your little story, you forget that you've got to ask for something, right? Remember what the goal was? What was the goal? Somebody? Get the investor to accept your email. Exactly. See, the guys in the front are paying attention. What's happening to you guys back there? So if we look at these 4 components, let me use an example of a pitch. So this is a while ago. It's not a current story. But there was this entrepreneur, retail entrepreneur, built a bunch of jewelry stores. This is a real story. Barnett Helzberg. He was at a hotel in New York when he overheard somebody calling out to Warren Buffett, Mr. Buffett. Okay. So he assumed that, well, I'm sure there's more than one Mr. Buffett in the world, but he assumed this is the Mr. Buffett, Warren Buffett. You've all heard of Warren Buffett, right? Everybody has. And Helzberg had never met Buffett. But it turned out, he was getting on in years. He was in his 60s, and he was thinking about, he didn't have children to take over his business, so he was thinking about selling his jewelry store business. And he wasn't actively doing it, but he said, look, he'd read about Buffett. He understood the kind of things that Buffett invested in, and he thought, maybe Buffett would be interested in buying his jewelry store. So he steps up to him and introduces himself. Okay, so he's got 15, 30 seconds. Buffett's, even in '94, he was a pretty important guy. He had billions under management. And he went up to him, and this is what he said. He said, Mr. Buffett, I've read a lot about your investment philosophy, and am a great admirer. Okay? Sir, I have a jewelry business that I think meets your investment criteria. Would you be interested in learning more about it? Now, can you do that in 15 seconds? Easily, right? Even the way I did it, which is really slow and measured, was still not much more than 15 seconds. So, let's break this up. What's the hook here? Anybody? What's the hook? Mr. Buffett. That's the hook right there. You called him by his name. This is a stranger walking up to you, and they call you by your name. Okay, you're a famous person, but still, you're not that famous. You're not Tom Cruise, or you're not, okay? So, somebody walked up to you and called you Mr. Buffett. That's the hook. Correct? See, somebody, they're listening. We'll keep going. What's the connection? I've read a lot about your investment strategy. right? That's a connection. What's the benefit? I have something you want. I have this jewelry business that meets your investment criteria. That's the benefit to the other person, right? And the ask is, would you be interested in learning more about it? It's period. Really simple, to the point, right? Every one of you should be able to tell your business story like this, that easily, to try to get the person to say, yes, I'm interested in hearing more about it. Yes, I'm interested in getting your executive summary. Okay? And now, if this was my class, I would all send you off to go write your elevator pitch. But since I don't have a class, I can't get you to do that. But so what happened? So Buffett hands Helzberg his business card. He said, yeah, send me something. Right, it's 94, so email's not been invented yet. It was invented, but it was in the university, so you had to actually FedEx it to him. You know, and then they parted ways. What do you think happened? His goal was what? He got his goal. He got his immediate goal. Absolutely. You got it right on the money. Got his goal. And even more importantly, he got his ultimate goal. He ended up selling his business to Buffett a year later for $500 million. Right? Now, I mean, you look at this and you say, okay, there's no way this could be me, right? Because it just feels like a fairy tale. The guy just happens to be somewhere, he happens to run into Mr. Buffett, he happens to have something for sale that Mr. Buffett might want to buy. It all comes together. It feels like complete luck, right? But I don't know about you guys. In 30 years of doing startups, I've had many, many, many situations like this. Right? What's that adage? Fortune shines upon those who are ready to seize it. So luck, everybody gets lucky moments in their life. It's the people that are prepared to take advantage of that luck, right, are the ones who move forward. So nobody is, at least I don't believe, I mean, some of you people might pray every morning and you may be luckier than the rest of us. But I don't think anybody's any luckier than anybody else, right? Luck, you know, shines on everybody in equal measure. It's the people who are prepared to seize that moment when luck presents itself are the ones who succeed. And what does that mean? First of all, it means be prepared. Have that elevator pitch ready, right? Ready and in your head, right? Memorized. You have to, it's no different than acting. First of all, you write your pitch and you sit in front of a mirror and you memorize that damn thing. You say it over and over and over again. Just imagine you're going to meet Bill Gates, or imagine you're going to meet, you know, I don't know who the richest man in Brazil is. Who is it? Ike? Ike Batista. Imagine you meet Ike, right? You got to have that ready. Practice it in front of your peers. Practice it wherever you have to practice it, but be ready when you get that opportunity. And when you get that opportunity, don't hesitate. Don't hesitate. Because you know what? Every billionaire used to be like you. No different. They're no different. Right? So be ready, get up there, say your piece. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? You may not achieve your goal. Right? Not the end of the world. It doesn't matter. But if you're earnest, you believe it, you believe in yourself, you believe your story, you'll be surprised. You'll get more yeses than nos. Right? So you're not going to be able to see this. I tried every which way to do this in a different way. But this is a template if you guys, can you guys see it? I mean, there's screens back there too, I think, but this is a template that I use for the next phase. So remember, we talked about the 30-second elevator pitch. Then there's your 3-minute presentation and your 10-minute presentation. So this is kind of a template that I use for telling now the 3 and 10-minute presentations. And you know, I know most of you guys are taking photos of the screen. I can get this out to you through people. So, because you can't read it that well, I'll walk you through it. So again, you know, when I started, so I've been an entrepreneur, and I've had to do these pitches many, many, many times. I've been on the receiving end of these pitches as a venture capitalist and angel investor many times. And then when I started teaching, you know, I teach a new ventures class. The first time I taught, I teach at night, 3-hour class, 6 to 9 p.m. Half the kids in the class are working during the day and then doing their MBA at night. The other half are full-time. And after the first 2 or 3 classes of giving my lecture, like a corporate guy was giving a lecture with PowerPoints and all that stuff, the students were falling asleep. You can tell when people are falling asleep in an audience, right? So they're falling asleep. I said, oh my God, I have no idea how to do this. I don't know how to teach. So I said, I've got to go learn how to teach. So I went in, and they don't teach you how to teach. You know, they take a business guy and they assume they know. The business guy knows how to convince people about things. But students are the hardest people to convince about anything because they hear hundreds and hundreds of people like me go on and on and on. So anyways, I learned how to, what I learned is, just like your storytelling, I learned this is theater. I have to tell a story somehow, right? And what I learned is the way you tell a story, what all good professors do, if you watch them, they tell a story in a way that each person in the audience feels like they're part of the story. And there's this kind of interaction, one-on-one part of the story. So I started thinking that way, and I said, okay, well, maybe this is how we have to think about investor pitches too. Let's sort of think about it as in that language. So I created this kind of language, you know. So number one, if you're a performer, what's the first thing you got to know? It's right up there. What's the first thing you have to know? Anybody? What's the first thing you have to know? Anybody else? You got to know who your audience is, right? You have to know who's out there. You have to understand why they're there. And when you're doing these investor pitches, your audience is not always going to be the same. You're going to have different audiences. A venture capitalist is a different audience than an angel investor, right? They have different motivations. What is the motivation of a venture capitalist? Can anybody tell me? First of all, has anybody received money from a venture capitalist in this room? Anybody? Not a single person. Has anybody received money from an angel investor in this room? We got one. Why did that angel investor want to invest in your company?
He liked the team and he was passionate about the subject of the company.
Yeah, so 2 things. He liked the team and he was passionate about the subject, right, about the story. He was passionate about the story, right? So most angel investors, in my experience, invest for a couple of reasons. I don't have as much experience as Catherine, but my experience, most angel investors invest for one of 2 reasons. Number one, they really like the entrepreneur. There's something they see in that entrepreneur. Sometimes I feel it reminds them of themselves, you know, at that age or that time in their life, right? So they already have their own story in their head. Now they're hearing a story from this person and they say, oh, I understand that story. That's a lot like my own story. And so I can see where that story is going to go, right? And the second reason is that it's a space they really understand. You know, doctors like investing in medical things because it's a space they understand. So they see a product and they say, oh yeah, that's a good product. I'd use that if I was a surgeon, right? So understanding your audience, right? Now, venture capitalists are very different. What is a venture capital firm? What is a venture capitalist? Can somebody tell me? Anybody? Take a guess. Don't worry, nobody will remember you got up and said something. What is a venture capitalist firm? Anybody? Shout it out.
An investment company.
It's an investment company, right? Who is their customer? Sorry? Their investors are their customer, right? What are their investors looking for from? They're looking for returns, profits, right? Now you're the entrepreneur and you're pitching to them. They're going to give you money, right? But you're not their customer. Their customer is the person who's, you know, giving them money. They're middlemen. They're basically taking somebody else's money, finding, you know, young entrepreneurs with good stories, you know, investing in them, and then helping those young entrepreneurs build their companies, right? With the hope at some point there'll be an exit and they'll return some of that money to their investors. So, what's this person thinking about the whole time? Well, obviously money, yeah. But they're listening to you tell your story, right? So what are they thinking about in their head? I'm sorry?
Their clients are their life.
So you're talking about their clients, meaning the investors,
Yes.
or no, they don't care about that. Because they're in the business of being, their clients who are the limited partners who are giving them money don't want, I mean, they really don't want to know about these investments. They only care about one thing, their return. They give you money, and in the 10-year period, they want to get back many times that money. That's what they care about. So that's not what the venture capital, what's the venture capitalist thinking about? You were saying?
He's thinking about that idea that the money is investing back.
Right.
That's what he's
Right.
sure.
That's what he's thinking about. You're telling your story. Your story's generally about, well, I found a problem in the marketplace. I've come up with a solution for this problem, and my solution is unique. And not only is my solution unique, but me and my team members are the only people who can do this. That's the story, at a very high level. That's the story you're telling. The venture guy is just thinking, okay, if I give these guys money so they can go play out their story, how am I going to get my money back times 10 or times 5? That's what they're thinking at that moment. You know, they're not thinking about, well, do I like this person? You know, they're not thinking about, you know, their lunch meeting coming up. They're not thinking about it. They're only thinking about, how does this thing turn into a 5x investment? That's your audience, right? Now, you know, most investors will go, you know, most entrepreneurs will do their pitch, and then the last slide will be, okay, we want $3 million from you, and then our exit will be an IPO or an M&A, and we think our exit is going to be $50 million. You don't know. I mean, your story is so early, you really don't have any idea. But the investor is going to, you know, be thinking about that. But as I'll show you in a moment, you don't have to go straight to that punchline. The investor can see if there truly is a problem, you truly have something unique, and you are the right team, he can figure out that, yes, I'm going to get the exit, right? So your goal, once you know your audience, right, your act 1, as I call it, is you have to set up the story. That's your act 1. So what does set up the story mean? Describe the problem, right? Describe kind of a general solution to the problem, and describe your solution, right? And you're doing that probably in about one slide. By the way, these numbers down the side are slide numbers. So as you can see from this, I have 11 slides in my presentation. 11 slides to tell your whole story, right? You can easily spend an hour on 11 slides, easily. You know, I never have any presentation that I've ever given in my life that's longer than 10 or 11 slides for anything. Because if you have too many slides, you just can't get your story across. The best stories are told very succinctly, right? In a few number of slides. So your slide number one is to set up the story. And by the way, this is just not for slide presentations. Your executive summary can follow the same storyline. When you send that, after the elevator pitch, when you send something out, you don't have to send your slide presentation out. In fact, you probably shouldn't. What you should have is a one-page executive summary. Sometimes people have two-page executive summaries, but I've actually created a template that's, you know, a little busy, but I organize it in a couple of columns and in, you know, well kind of understood boxes that tell the story in one page. Right? Investor looks at that one page and decides whether they want to invite you in for the one-on-one meeting. So Act 1, set up the story. Act 2 is the story itself. All right? And again, once you see this more carefully, the green is the 3-minute version. The right column is the exact same things, but expanded out to your 10 to 30-minute presentation. So what are you doing in Act 2? Number one, you're giving them a market overview, right? You're showing them what does this market look like that you're selling into, right? Who are the potential customers? What market share do they have in their business? How will your solution impact their market share? Will it help their market share? Or will it help their margins, right? Who are their competitors? Who are your competitors? Who else is offering solutions like yours into this marketplace? All those kind of things, a kind of a market view. And you'll be surprised at how entrepreneurs do not know this, the market overview. Because, you know, the reality is, in today's world, almost certainly what you're doing, there's somebody else doing it. There's probably more than one person doing it. There are many people doing it, right? And they may not be in Brazil, right? They may be, you know, in some other country, but there are other people doing it. And the way you find out what this market situation looks like is, yes, you can go to the internet, you can get reports, you can find things. Yes, you should do that. But, you know, like I tell my students, there is absolutely no substitute for primary market research. And what does primary market research mean? It means you've got to pick up the phone, old-fashioned, pick up the phone or put your shoes on, right? And talk to somebody, one-on-one. Who do you talk to? Well, you use the internet and you find out, first of all, who the key opinion leaders are in your market. And you can find that out because the key opinion leaders always come up in the Google searches on the higher pages. You can find out the ones they had quoted. They could be industry analysts, they could be, you know, professors, they could be, you don't know, they come from anywhere. You find these key opinion leaders and you pick up the phone and you call them, right? The easiest time to call these people is when you're a student. You know why? Because everybody will accept a call from a student. Everybody will accept a call from a student. people want to help students out. So if you say, you know, I'm taking a new ventures course at Boston University, and I'm working on this business plan, you know, may I speak to you about it? You'll be surprised. Even the most important people will find time for students. So, in some ways, the best time to start a business is when you're still a student, because you can learn a lot about the marketplace. People will talk to you because they don't think you're going to be successful. They say, yeah, he's a student. I mean, what's a student going to do? I just tell them everything. It doesn't matter, right? It's the best time to start a company because people will just not believe that you're ever going to be able to take this information they're giving you and do anything useful with it. They think it's just an exercise for your class, but no, it's a secret weapon. You should remember that. The next part of your Act 2 is the industry overview, and so I sort of mixed up these two when I first started speaking. So the market overview is really about your target market customers. The industry overview is about the competition and, you know, all that kind of stuff. I mean, who are the people actually supplying to this customer base, right? And then the third part of it is your business model, right? What is it that you're offering? What's its pricing model? Why is it going to work? What's your team? Why this team? Right? And it's really interesting. You know, as an investor, and you know, now as a professor, I see a lot of business plans, and it's quite amazing how the majority of these stories, when people tell them, fall apart in the business model, in the business case, because and usually it's because they haven't really understood the market, or they really haven't understood their industry. And when they make that business model case, you know, you can ask a few simple questions and you realize they haven't really understood this marketplace. And it falls apart right here. More stories fall apart right here in the business model than anywhere else. But the reason they fall apart is because you haven't built up your story properly from the beginning. Right? And you know, it used to be that the world was a simple place. You either offered a product or you offered a service. Right? If you offered a product, you know, you usually offered it for, you know, a price, and at that price you could make a certain margin on your product. And if it was a service, yeah, you could have a monthly service, like a cell phone service. You know, or you could have a cleaning service where you charged by every time you came in and cleaned. And it was simple. Business models, because of the internet, have started getting pretty interesting, right? Give me an interesting business model on the internet. And what's a Google model?
Search engine marketing, they have a kind of a, how should I call it, label, I don't know how to speak this in English.
It's called what?
Yeah, they have kind of functions for the relevance of the ads.
Okay.
That's interesting.
So ads, right? It's an advertising model. But it's an advertising model that's, is it the same as television? Why not? Why is it the same as television?
Because it's related to search engine. So you are given an ad while you're looking for that subject, so it's really precise and it has a different kind of field because it's not.
But what is Google's goal in the search engine?
Result. I mean, you pay for what you get.
You pay for what you get. Who pays for it?
As an advertiser.
The advertiser pays for it, right? So why is that different from television? An advertiser pays for what they get on television.
Because on TV you don't have an interaction necessarily. You are not sure.
So TV is a simplex medium, we call it, right? It's one way. Whereas the internet is duplex. So that is a difference. But in the end, Google's still trying to get an audience. They're getting eyeballs, right? And they're getting eyeballs. Now, their eyeballs are very different. In television, you know, when Nielsen goes out and does a rating of a show, they randomly call a few people and say, did you watch the show, for how long, right? And from that, they extrapolate and say, well, we had an audience of 60 million for this show for 1 hour, so advertiser, you have to pay, you know, so much per impression. And they auction it, just like Google would, right? With Google, it's more definite because there's other models. There's a click-to-pay model. So you search something, it comes up, and yes, if you come up near the top, you pay more than somebody comes up below. Now, if you actually click on one of those, you pay even more. So these are different business models. There are nuances, but it's an advertising model, but it's a different type of advertising model. There's another model, right, called the freemium model. I don't know if you guys have followed that. So there, you know, does anybody use Evernote? You know, thinking? So all of you do. So, you know, the CEO of Evernote is a BU alum, and he was just at my office a couple of weeks ago, and you know, he's very passionate about giving most of the features of Evernote for free. Do any of you pay for it? No, I don't either. I have the free version of Evernote, and it fits me perfectly. I have the free version of LinkedIn. Fits me perfectly, right? But there's lots of people who pay a little bit to get the extra features of Evernote or LinkedIn. That's a freemium model. So there's a free version and there's a premium. So these new business models actually create complexity when you're telling your story, because it's not that simple anymore. So when you tell your business case, you have a lot of options now for your business model, and you have to think about what's the right option. In fact, your competitive advantage in some cases could be your business model. You could be offering the exact same product or service as somebody else, but with a better business model or a different business model. Anybody have an example of that? Skype. Why Skype?
Because Skype offers voice calls,
Yeah.
which is the same
as a phone company.
As a phone company, but for free.
Yes.
And if you want to call to an actual phone, you have to pay for it.
Yeah. So if it's a Skype to Skype call, it's free. But if it's a Skype to a phone call, you pay. Right? That's a good example. You know, even a more mundane example. I don't know the cell phone business in Brazil that well, but in the U.S., you know, we have two big carriers in the cell phone business, AT&T and Verizon, right? And they basically, you know, they innovate business models very slowly. I mean, but there's a new player who came in, Metro PCS, and they managed to get a decent market share in the business by just one simple business model twist, which is they had an all-you-can-eat plan before these other guys, right? So I don't know what I think their latest is $50 a month, all the voice calls you want, all the SMS you want, and all the browsing you want for $50 a month. And that is a business model innovation. It sounds trivial, right? To a technology entrepreneur like me, it really sounds trivial. Okay, you're just changing pricing in a way. But it is a business model change, and it does have an impact on consumers. So what I'm trying, it's a long-winded way of telling you is that the world's got more complex about your business models, and that you can tell your story in a way where the business model becomes a key part of your competitive advantage in the story. But you also have to remember that most stories I hear fall apart at the business model. And they fall apart at the business model because you haven't given enough thought to the market situation. Like I was just probing you about Google, and you know, asking why it's different from television. You have to go through that level of detail, right? I mean, I don't know the television business at all. If I were going to come and propose an advertising model on some business, I'd better go find out about the television advertising business, right? And the television advertising business has been around a long time, so there's lots of information on it. You can find out about it. You know, yes, it's better to do primary research, but even in that case, there'll be lots of good reports and stuff that'll tell you about the television advertising business. But you need to do that in order to make a compelling case in your business model. Then the last part of Act 2 is the climax, meaning now you're trying to sort of summarize, in a way, your execution plan, right? So you've told the story, here's a problem, you framed it, here's a problem, here's our solution, here's what the market looks like, here's our industry situation, here's our, our offering, our business model, and then, this is what execution looks like. And, if it's a brand new business, you can put a 5-year projection in there, but everybody understands that's nonsense, right? What people want to know is, what are you going to do in the next year? If I'm going to give you money, tell me what you're going to do with it in the next year. And so you want to lay out what you're going to do with it in the next year, right? And by the way, the amount of money that you're asking for has to be tied into your story and this execution plan. They have to connect to each other. I think yesterday, one of the angel investors said that, he'll get an investor who comes to him, he gets an entrepreneur who comes to him and says, okay, I need $3 million, and the valuation I'm offering is $5 million for my company. And so then you ask the question, well, what do you need the $3 million for? And, they can't answer the question. I just need $3 million. That's how much I need. What are you going to do with the $3 million? I'm going to get to profitability. Okay, what are the steps to profitability? So the way most investors work, the way the system works in the US, and it's kind of spreading now all over the world, is you get enough money to achieve a major milestone, right? And if you achieve that major milestone, then you have to go back and ask for more money to achieve your next major milestone. So let's use an example. If you're creating a software company, right? What's your first major milestone? The software guy can tell us. What's the first major milestone? Sorry? The product, right? Develop a version of the product. It may not be the final production version, but it'll be a beta version or some version of the software. How much money do you need to achieve that milestone, right? How much money do you need to develop, a decent kind of product? Let's pick a space, not in the enterprise space, which can get more complicated, but in the consumer internet space. How much money do you think it takes to create that first product, beta product? Anybody? Approximately. You should know. A couple $100,000. That's a great thing about the software industry today, is that the software stack has been built up, right? So in order to actually deploy a consumer software application today, only takes a couple of $100,000. So you shouldn't come asking for $3 million if you're doing a software business to achieve that major milestone. You should actually seriously think about only asking for a couple $100,000. Again, as I told you in the beginning, there are many ways to tell your story. This isn't the only way. I have companies I'm starting out of view, lots of them. I'm starting 20 plus companies. 2 have got venture back, 6 have got angel back. And they all have their own story. They're different stories. Yes? You had a question? She's just stretching. All right, is it time for a 7th inning stretch? Nobody got that. Baseball analogy. Baseball here. What's the soccer analogy? Time to get up and kick the ball around? I lost my train of thought. What was I talking about? Oh, software. Yes, software. So we're doing a few software startups, and there's 1 or 2 of them where $200K, $250K is all they need, and that's a small amount of money. At BU, I write them a 100K check, they get another 100K from somewhere else, they've got 200K. Just to go prove this first milestone. There's other companies. We have this really interesting company that's based on a PhD thesis of a student, a graduate student with their advisor. It's kind of cool. So they've spent 6 years or more building a database of reviews, right? Yelp reviews, TripAdvisor reviews, Amazon reviews. There's a lot of reviews out there. I don't know if any of you have used reviews, but it's very painful, right? Like, you come into Rio, you want to go out for dinner somewhere and you don't know anybody. Have you ever tried going through these reviews to find a place to go out for dinner? It can take you an hour because you don't know who to trust, who to believe, whether they're like you or not like you. So these guys have built a database. Now they've built a really interesting engine that can tell you the sentiment behind the reviewer. They can tell you about the reviewer, whether that reviewer is somebody you can trust or not, whether the reviewer is actually with, is with the company that, that is being reviewed, so on and so forth. So I looked at this thing and I said, this is really interesting. The story here, I don't think, is to get $200,000 to go build a prototype. This is a much bigger story, in my opinion. So I told them, we're not going to do the usual software story. We're going to go all out with this one because I think this is a big opportunity. It's differentiated. We're filing intellectual property behind it around their algorithms and stuff. We're going to go all the way. We're going to go right to a Series A. So in the venture world, those milestone-based investments are called series. So Series A, Series B, Series C, so on and so forth. So we're going to go straight to a Series A, probably like $3 to $5 million Series A. But the milestone that we're going to try to achieve, because we're going to do a direct-to-consumer play, is we're going to get 1 million users using this at the end of the Series A. Different milestone, different kind of investor that you're going to tell the story to. But it's a different way of thinking about it. So there's many ways to tell a story. But the important thing to understand is, you can tell a story where you're only looking for $200,000, right? But it's important to understand that for yourself because you need that execution plan. What milestones are you trying to achieve with that $200,000? What milestones are you trying to achieve with the $3 million, right? And then Act 3 is the equivalent of the ask in the elevator pitch. Act 3 is the close. It's, what's the goal? Remember what the goal was? Anybody remember? What's the goal? What's the goal? No, that was the elevator pitch. What's the act out of this one? What's the goal out of this one? No, that's true. If it's a 3-minute one, you want to get the meeting. But really, what's the real goal here? Due diligence, right? You want them to go into due diligence. That means you want somebody to be assigned to it who's going to spend time and start digging into your story. That's what the goal here is. So you have to be focused on your goal. You can't just tell your story and walk out. You now have to close. Like a good salesperson, you have to ask for the order. You have to ask for that next step. No, you're not going to get it every time, but you still have to ask for it. And that's what Act 3 is about. Act 3 is about getting it from them. So you got to summarize it. You have to ask the question, are you guys interested? Do you want to learn more? Right? That's your last act. It's that simple. The hard thing is all of us have great stories, right? And one thing I'm learning about people in Brazil, you love telling stories. And people will tell the story, and they're fun stories, but they go on, they can be very long stories sometimes. The hardest thing is, how do you sort of just like, I'm sure all of you have been to plays, right? And plays start on time, they end on time, right? Because it takes a lot of effort to get all these people doing things together. And good plays are amazing, right? You can sit there and be excited about it all the way through. This is the same thing. So how do you tell your story in a way that this audience is going to be excited about it, right, through the 3 minutes? And this is a sales process. This is a sales process. It's a different sales process than selling your product or service to a customer, but it's a sales process. You're selling to the investor. You're selling your story, right? Selling is not always comfortable for many people. And some societies, selling is, feels like, salespeople are considered a little bit dirty, salespeople. But if you're an entrepreneur, you're selling. If you don't like selling, don't be an entrepreneur. Seriously. Because you're selling all the time. You're selling your story to investors, you're selling your story to customers, right? Think about it. What big company wants to bet their future on a small company? It's, why should they? I think, who's across the street here? Vale, right? That's a big company, right? How many small companies do you think Vale does business with? I bet you not very many, right? So when you're a small company, getting a big company to take a bet on you is difficult. So you've got to sell. You're selling the story. You're selling the story to your employees because you want to hire good employees, but usually you don't have enough cash, or you want to give them equity when you're first starting off instead of cash, or even if you do have cash, you're not going to pay a really good person the same thing they could be making, at a big company. You're going to pay them less because you're also going to give them some equity. So how do you convince them? How do you convince them that your story is a good story and that you're going to be around in 2 or 3 years from now still telling the story? You do all this because, one, you believe in what you're doing, but you're a good salesperson, right? And a good salesperson tells a story really well. And they tell the story really well not because somehow they're great storytellers. No, they do it because they practice. They take their time, they put this together, and then they practice. And you practice, and you practice, and you practice. There's no other way. There's no other way for any of us. I still practice. You have no choice. It's not, this stuff is just not natural. I mean, you have to, you think about it. So you got to take the time, and you need to practice. The other thing you have to do is, every time you tell the story, you should have somebody in the room from your team looking at the reactions in the room as you tell your story. You're telling the story, it's hard for you sometimes to see, how people are feeling. You want somebody else in the room who can feel what people are thinking. Are they getting bored? Are they interested? What point do they jump up and suddenly show interest? Those kind of things, right? I'll tell you a little story on that. And this can't leave this room. So one of the companies that I was founding, it's a mobile company. You guys could try to figure out which one it is out of my portfolio. They were pitching, and I told them, I said, we had great investors on the East Coast. I said, we must get a West Coast investor. So we got an audience with Kleiner Perkins, the best venture firm on the planet, according to lots of people. And one of the biggest brands at Kleiner Perkins is John Doerr. John Doerr was in the room, right? He came, he had a pile of business plans. He brought him into the room with him and he put him down. He sat down. My team's telling the story, and John Doerr is asleep. His head is down on the pile of business plans. He's fast asleep. Okay? So all the handlers, the other people in the room, the associates, everybody's like packing up, ready to go. The secretaries are going up and down the hallway, ready to yank him out. And we had taken one of our engineers as part of the presentation. He comes up, starts talking about it. He said, look, L'Oreal was using our product. It was an app on the iPad in the store, and women didn't have to go and talk to somebody to try out a lipstick. They could go to this app and play around with the colors, and it was very popular. And he said their same-store sales where they had this app went up by, I forget, X percent. John Doerr gets up, right? He says, go to the end of your presentation. We go to the financials, and we had aggressive financials, right? We're going to turn this into a $10, $15 million business. He said, how can we turn this into a $500 million business, right? You had them. And they invested, right? So, I mean, who would have predicted? I mean, he was listening. This guy's probably seen a million business plans. And he was asleep, but he was listening, somehow. Right? So, you need to understand that. And so what it was that engineer getting up and saying that one little story about one of our customers and what a big jump up the customer had using our product. Boom, that got him excited. So the next time you tell the story, what are you going to do? You're going to make damn well sure that that case study is going to be front and center in your story. Right? So you're continuously improving your story. Every time you tell the story, you see where you get the laughs, you see where you get the attention, and you make it better, and you make it better. There's nothing. You aren't born to be a story. I mean, some people are better at storytelling than others, but you become a good storyteller by practicing and continuously improving and listening to the audience. So that's my story. Thank you. Thank you.